You've worked hard to build what you have. Now let's make sure you get to keep it. Welcome to On Course Financial. I'm your host, Chris Brumlow. I'm a partner and investment advisor representative at the BAB Group. Each episode, we break down the tax strategies, retirement income decisions, and financial planning moves that help you as individuals and small business owners, pre-retirees and retirees, protect their wealth and build a retirement they can actually count on. Let's get on course. What if I told you that back in 2010, 16 years ago, the nation's top financial auditor sat down and wrote a roadmap of exactly how America was going to financially self-destruct, and nobody listened? His name is David Walker. He served as the Comptroller General of the United States, essentially the country's chief accountant under 4 presidents. He was the CEO of the Government Accountability Office. He spent his career with access to the numbers most Americans never see. And in his book called Come Back America, he laid out a clear, fact-based warning. We're building a fiscal crisis that would eventually threaten Social Security, drive tax rates through the roof, and burden future generations with a debt load they couldn't carry. That was 2010. I want to spend today's episode showing you exactly where we stand now in 2026, comparing it to what Walker predicted, because the numbers are sobering, and because what you do about it in your own financial plan could be the most important decisions of your retirement. Now, welcome to On Course Financial. I'm your host, Chris Brumlow. I'm a partner at the BAB Group, where we combine holistic tax planning, accounting, wealth management, and income planning all under one roof. Let's get onto it. So, who is David Walker and what is Come Back America? Before we get into the numbers, let me set the stage on who David Walker is and why this book matters. Walker served as the 7th Comptroller General of the United States, a role that's appointed to a 15-year term, specifically so it spans multiple administrations and can't be politicized. He served under Reagan, both Bushes, and Clinton. He ran the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, which is sometimes called the Congressional Watchdog. It's the group that audits the federal government. In other words, this is a man who actually looked at the books, not the political spin, not the press releases, the actual balance sheet of the United States of America. And what he saw scared him enough to write a book about it. Come Back America came out in 2010. The full title is Come Back America, Turning the Country Around and Restoring Fiscal Responsibility. It's a bipartisan book, and I mean that. He criticizes both parties. His argument isn't political, it's actuarial. His core message was simple. We are a great nation. We have a lot to be proud of, but we're making promises we cannot keep, spending money that we don't have. And the generation coming behind us is going to pay a brutal price for it unless we act now. He identified 5 main problem areas: the national debt and deficit spending, Social Security, Medicare and healthcare cost, the tax code, and the defense budget. And he said all 5 needed serious reform simultaneously to avoid crisis. He was endorsed by Ross Perot, the former Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill, the former Senator Bill Bradley, and the former Treasury Secretary Robert Rubin. Left and right. It wasn't ideological, it was math. So, how did all that math hold up 16 years later? Let's find out. Let's start with the big one, the national debt. When Walker wrote Come Back America in 2010, the national debt was roughly $13 trillion, and he considered that a crisis. He warned that if we didn't change course, the debt would compound to unmanageable levels, and that interest alone would eventually crowd out every other national priority. So where are we today? As of early April 2026, the total gross national debt is just under $39 trillion and growing at approximately $7.6 billion a day. That's $5.2 million a minute. Let that number sink in for a second. That's roughly a tripling of the national debt in 16 years. And it's not slowing down. The Congressional Budget Office projects deficits exceeding $2 trillion every year for the next decade under current law. Now, here's the part that should alarm every person listening to this, especially anyone planning retirement. The interest payments on that debt, Walker warned that if the debt kept compounding, the interest cost would eventually eat the budget alive. 5 years ago, net interest payments on the federal debt were about $345 billion a year. Today, they're approaching $1 trillion, nearly tripling in 5 years. In fiscal 2025, the interest on the debt hit $1.2 trillion. We are now spending more on interest than Medicaid, more than we spend on defense. And the CBO projects interest will consume nearly 15% of all federal outlays in the fiscal year 2028. Walker's warning, inflation is the cruelest tax of all. You have no control over it, and it reduces your effective purchasing power. Printing money to cover debt cheapens the dollar and triggers inflation. We saw exactly how that could play out post-COVID. When the government injected trillions of dollars into the economy and the debt exploded, inflation followed. For retirees and near retirees, that's not an abstract concern. That's your grocery bill. That's your Medicare premiums. That's the purchasing power of every dollar you've saved. And when Walker specifically warned about foreign creditors, particularly China, reducing their purchases of U.S. Treasury bonds, which would drive up interest rates. Sound familiar? In April 2025, tariff escalation with China raised this exact concern. When foreign holders of U.S. debt start reassessing their exposure, our interest rates go up. Our interest rate risk goes up. And so does our mortgage rates, our car loans, and the cost of accessing capital across the entire economy. Score one and then some for David Walker. Now, let's talk about Social Security, because this is very personal for a lot of you listening. Walker's argument on Social Security was very straightforward. The system had a math problem. Baby boomers were retiring in massive numbers. Life expectancy was increasing, and the number of workers per retiree was shrinking. He said back in 2010 that modest reforms made early would prevent catastrophic cuts later. He urged gradual eligibility adjustments, modest benefit modifications, and honest conversations with the American public. Nobody had that conversation. So here's where we are in 2026. The Social Security Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund is projected to reach insolvency by late 2032. That's when today a 60-year-old hits his full retirement age. At that point, under current law, benefits would automatically be cut by approximately 24% across the board for every recipient, regardless of income and regardless of need. A couple retiring just after that date would roughly see $18,400 in annual benefits disappear. For high-income couples, that could approach $24,400. For lower-income retirees, the dollar amount is smaller, but as a percentage of their income, it's devastating. And I need to be direct with you about something that most financial conversations skip over. It's actually getting worse faster than projected. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed in 2025 is estimated to accelerate Social Security insolvency by pulling revenue away from the trust fund through lower tax rates on Social Security benefits. The Social Security chief actuary confirmed this. Insolvency is now projected to arrive roughly a year earlier than it would have otherwise without that legislation. Here's the number that tells the whole story. Experts now calculate that restoring Social Security's long-term solvency today would require either a 29% payroll tax increase or a 22% across-the-board benefit cut for all. And if we wait until 2034, those numbers jump to a 34% tax increase, or a 26% cut. Every year of inaction makes the eventual remedy more painful. Walker said it. The math said it. And 16 years of political inaction have proven it. So what does all this mean for you practically? If you're 55 to 65 years old now, Social Security in its current form may look different by the time you reach 70. That doesn't mean don't count on it, but it does mean you shouldn't build your entire retirement income strategy around a benefit that may be subject to legislation or automatic reduction. You need income sources that Congress can't touch. More on that in a minute. Walker had a fascinating and frustrating observation about Medicare in his Comeback America. He noted that healthcare costs represented an overwhelming majority of the long-term fiscal problem. About 80% of the $56 trillion hole he identified at the time was projected healthcare obligations, and yet Washington never gave it the serious attention it deserved. Sound familiar in 2026? Because nothing has changed on that front. The Medicare Hospital Insurance Trust Fund, according to the most recent Congressional Budget Office projections, is now projected to be exhausted by 2040. And that number just moved. It's 12 years earlier than what the CBO estimated just a year ago. The drivers are higher than expected spending, rising Medicare Advantage cost, and a demographic reality. More retirees, fewer workers, faster than projected. In the past several months, combined Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid outlays have increased by $84 billion, roughly 8%, driven by cost of living adjustments and rising healthcare costs. And that trajectory doesn't reverse on its own. For retirees, Medicare cost hits you directly. Most people deduct Medicare premiums right out of their Social Security check. When those premiums rise, and they have, and they will, your effective net Social Security benefit shrinks even further. You're getting squeezed on both sides. Walker called for an honest healthcare budgeting and a governing body to set national priorities. What we've gotten instead is a series of short-term patches and political avoidance. The math gets harder each and every year that this goes unaddressed. Here's where it really gets interesting. What Walker said about taxes. And it's where I think it's an urgent, actionable message for every listener. Walker's position on taxes was direct. He said the tax code needed simplification. He said honest reform required acknowledging that more Americans, not just those labeled as rich, would eventually need to contribute more. He said that politicians who talked about fiscal responsibility while refusing to be honest about the revenue side were deceiving the public. What has actually happened since 2010? Well, we've had two major rounds of tax cuts in 2017 and 2025. That added trillions of dollars to the structural deficit. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed in 2025 alone is estimated to add over $4 trillion of new deficits over the coming decade. Now, I want to be fair here. There are legitimate economic arguments for tax cuts stimulating growth, but the arithmetic is unambiguous. You cannot cut taxes while running a $2 trillion annual deficit with $1 trillion in annual interest payments, and Social Security and Medicare heading towards insolvency, and expect the math to balance. Walker projected that by 2030, absent reform, federal taxes could double from their current levels. And we're 4 years from 2030. And while tax rates haven't doubled, the structural presence for higher rates in the future has never been greater. This is exactly why at the BAB Group, we constantly talk about tax diversification and finding our way to the 0% tax bracket, the power of zero. The question is not whether taxes are going up. The question is, are you positioned in a way that gives you the flexibility and protection when they do? Are you building income tax in tax-free buckets, Roth accounts, Roth 401ks, Roth IRAs, Roth conversions, properly structured life insurance, so that no matter what Congress does, you have options? That's not a political position, that's a planning position. And that's exactly what is needed in this moment. And that's what history is going to demand. I wonder what David Walker would say today. If David Walker sat down at a microphone today, April of 2026, I think he would say something like this. The warnings were issued, the data was clear, the solutions were available, and the political will to act was absent in both parties. The window to make gradual, managed adjustment has narrowed dramatically. And what once required modest reform now requires serious sacrifice. And the longer we wait, the more burden falls on the people who had nothing to do with creating the problem. I think he would also say that this is the spirit of the book's title, that a comeback is still possible. America has pulled itself from the brink before. The solutions exist. Bipartisan frameworks like the Simpson-Bowles bill, like the Comeback America initiative itself, have been proposed. What is missing is the political courage to implement it. Now, one more thing that Walker emphasized, and I think this gets lost, is stewardship. He defined it as the leader's responsibility, not just to perform today, but to leave things in better position for the future. He said the baby boomer generation was failing its stewardship and its obligation to its children and its grandchildren. I think about that word stewardship a lot in the context of what we do at the BAB Group, because financial planning is a stewardship. You're not just making decisions for today, you're protecting your family's future, you're building a legacy, and you're making sure that the people you love aren't left holding the bag that could have been avoided. Now, what does all this mean for your retirement right now? Let me bring this home. There are 4 practical takeaways from everything we've covered today. First of all, don't build your retirement on a single income stream. Social Security is real and you've earned it, but treat it as one leg of a stool, not the whole piece of furniture. The trust fund insolvency timeline is now less than a decade away. Build some income structures that Congress can't legislate away. Takeaway number 2, tax rates are likely to go up. Act now while tax rates are still relatively low. The math of the $39 trillion in debt, $1 trillion in annual interest payments, and the approaching entitlement insolvency has one inevitable endpoint: higher taxes. The 2025 tax cuts may be extended, but the structural presence and pressure doesn't go away. Roth conversions, Roth contributions, and tax-free income strategies are not just nice to have, they are an inflation and tax hedge built into your own plan. Takeaway number 3, healthcare costs will keep rising. Plan for them specifically. Medicare is under pressure. Premiums have risen. They'll keep rising. Factor healthcare cost as a major retirement expense category, not an afterthought, and consider strategies that protect your net Social Security income from being eroded by premium increases. Takeaway number 4, make decisions now, not later. Walker's entire thesis was that delay makes everything more expensive and more painful. The same is true in personal financial planning. The Roth conversions you do today at current tax rates is worth more than the ones you do in 2030 at a potentially higher tax rate. The tax planning you do now reduces the liability that your heirs will face later. Time is the variable that works for you or against you. And the current fiscal environment, it's working against the unprepared. If you'd like to talk through where you stand, if you're not sure on where your current plan accounts are, I'd like to hear from you. Visit babcfo.com or reach out to us directly. We offer a complimentary initial conversation and consultation, and we specialize in working with folks who are 10 to 15 years out from retirement or just now getting into retirement to help make sure that they get across the finish line with their income protected. David Walker called his book Comeback America because he believed and still believes that this country has what it takes to turn this around. The founding principles he wrote about, fiscal responsibility, stewardship, individual liberty, and accountability, those haven't gone anywhere. They just need to be applied. And while we wait for Washington to find the political courage to act at the federal level, the best thing that any of us can do is get our own house in fiscal order. Build an income that's resilient. Diversify across tax buckets. Plan for uncertainty. Work with people who can see your whole picture, not just the investments, but the taxes, the healthcare costs, the estate, the planning, the income strategy altogether. That's what we do at the BAB Group, and I hope this podcast does that for you every episode. Give you information and the perspective to help you make better decisions. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. If you found it valuable, please share with someone who you know is coming up or just getting into retirement. It could change that conversation that they're having with their current advisor. I'm Chris Brumlow, and this has been an episode of On Course Financial from the BAB Group. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next episode.